Really happy to have our guest today. This is going to be wonderful, very insightful, and of course, he's an Anselmian, so it's perfect. But before I get to our guest, I'm just going to tell you a couple quick things. Number one, this is being recorded, and by law, we need to tell you that. The second thing is that if you have a question, you can submit it through the Q&A function that you see on the Zoom, and we'll try to get to the questions before the time is up today. I especially want to thank Jim Flanagan and the Department of Advancement here at St. Anselm for helping us with all these Zooms. They're always our great partners in this, and they do fine work for the college. So today, we have someone who graduated just, 10 years ago from this institution, who's been going places since then. Matt Fuller he's been interviewing hundreds of members of Congress, speakers of the House. He has gone through many different issues in Washington as a reporter. He has covered government shutdowns, congressional shootings, all of the major legislation that we've seen come through in the last 10 years or so. And right now he reports on Congress for the Huffington Post. He previously reported for Roll Call, and before that, Congressional Quarterly. So he has really the big Capitol Hill players all on his resume at this point. In 2016, he won the Everett Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress. So quite a career so far after leaving the Hill. Matt, welcome today, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I really want to dig into what really is central. I was thinking on the way over here, if you or I were in the car, what would I really want to be digging into? I mean, you've had quite a background, as I just mentioned, but let's talk about January the 6th. Let's see in your eyes and your reporting, what did you see that day and what happened? And what do we not know about that that we should?
Yeah, from my vantage point, came in the morning and I could just sort of see that this was not the normal protest. We see a lot of protests on Capitol Hill, and it's sort of business as usual. I was over in my neighborhood and I'm just seeing sort of the parking situation was a lot different than I've ever seen it, where there was just so many cars illegally parked. And that was like the first clue, because it was like, these people don't really care about getting tickets or getting towed. It was kind of like, we're here on a mission and we're just going to park, right? So coming in, I'm kind of chatting with people here and there, and they're actually asking me, like, am I going to get ticketed here? And it's like, yeah, you're going to get ticketed. Like, you might not get towed. But I'm walking to the Capitol, and you could just sort of feel a tension, I guess. Living in D.C., you sort of see all the MAGA hats and Trump gear all the time. That's sort of normal. But I kind of approached up the on the east side, and I'm kind of going through. There's already a crowd assembled there. Come to find out, I didn't know it at the time, but this was actually the meeting ground of where the Proud Boys were, which is, I remember seeing them all in their orange caps and everything. But I'm coming through, and I see these cops marching through, and they kind of closed off the Capitol a little bit, so it was already some like bike racks basically. And it makes it difficult for the reporters like me to get into the building, because we have to kind of go all the way around all these places. So I see the collection of cops, and they're kind of marching toward, and they're all in riot gear. And I say, like, hey, I'm with the press. And, like, I flash a press badge, and the guy doesn't say anything else. He just like moved me right in front of him. Like, you're coming with us, like, just march with us. So it was clear to me at that point that they were a lot more concerned about this situation than, maybe I was. I was just sort of walking through as a member of the press. We get inside. It's sort of we knew it was going to be a busy day. I think things were supposed to start at around 1. The House came into session around noon. And very quickly, we started getting alerts on our phones about, there's a evacuation order in the Cannon House office building. If you're in the Madison building, which is sort of attached to the Capitol complex, sort of really a Library of Congress building, there's a bomb threat there. We sort of see this stuff, and it's like, okay, this could get serious. And then the president went on air, and he kind of really stirred up the base. And I think at that point, I'm kind of oblivious to really what's going on outside.
Were you able to hear the president at the time?
I heard a lot of it through. I listened to some of it, and then I also just sort of keeping track of it on Twitter. At some point, I was in the House chamber while he was speaking, so I wasn't actually listening to him. But I'm seeing the tweets go through, and I'm seeing the messages that are like, "Whoa, that's that's pretty provocative." That maybe not the conciliatory tone we need at this moment. But I'm in the House chamber, and it's sort of going on business as usual. They start the electoral college process, which I've personally seen happen 2 times before. Anyway, this is my 3rd time seeing it, and it's usually just a very humdrum affair. Like in 2012, I think it was like 20 minutes they did the whole thing. So that's going on, and we know it's going to be a long day. And again, we're getting these alerts, and at some point, they have they come to Arizona. Ted Cruz objects, and the Senate leaves, and they start this debate. And at that point, you kind of see staffers getting really kind of frantic, floor staffers. We also had some gallery staff who were telling us, like, hey, if you need to go to the bathroom, you probably need to do it now because they're going to lock us in the chamber very shortly. So things are kind of, staffers are moving around, and then suddenly they recess for a brief moment. This is when Nancy Pelosi gets pulled down from the chair, basically. And then cops all around the chamber start locking the doors. And they're doing it in a fashion.
When they took Pelosi out, was it a very physical thing, or was it sort of, they just kind of opted out and you sort of noticed it, or all of a sudden as a reporter, you're really focused in on what's going on?
So how the gallery is set up, we can't really see. The only person we really don't see very well is the presiding officer. I've subsequently seen that they really did kind of yank Pelosi away. It wasn't like come on, let's go. It was a very we're moving now. But I didn't quite see that, so I didn't know exactly what was happening. But I could tell from the floor staff that they were pretty freaked out. But they recessed, they locked the doors, and as you may know, the House chamber is supposed to be like a hermetically sealed thing. It's supposed to be that light doesn't come in from the outside, sound doesn't come in from the outside. It's the idea of it is that members could be locked in, and there could be protesters just outside the Capitol screaming and yelling, and they wouldn't know that. They're supposed to be able to be unbothered by that business. So I kind of figured, that's the situation. They're probably, they've probably breached the bike racks and everything. But then we're getting reports on Twitter and on our phones that the building is shut down because there's protesters in the building. And there's a moment right after they'd recessed and they came back into session, they recessed again. And at this point, the floor staff was apoplectic. They were like, you need to put on the emergency hoods. The emergency hoods are these breathing equipment, basically a plastic bag that's attached to a air purifier. Everyone put these emergency hoods on. You may need to get down on the ground. And by the way, your seat is actually bulletproof. So they might come through the door. And it was right around that time we started hearing slamming on the door. So they're banging at the door at the chamber, and it's like, wow, this was very quick. This all sort of happened. And there are, at the time when they first arrived at that door, there are still more than 100 members in the chamber. Some of them in the gallery, some of them on the floor. And they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, but it's clear they're going to evacuate the members. And at some point, they do evacuate the members, most of them at least. There was still some on the floor, but everyone in the chamber is stuck there because what's been going on in Capitol Hill is you're only supposed to have, actually, you're theoretically only supposed to have 13 members on the floor from each side because of coronavirus restrictions. That wasn't happening, and there were a ton of Republicans on the floor, but there were actually a lot of Democrats who were abiding by the rules who were up in the gallery. So you've got another 50 or 60 members up in the gallery, and there's no real plan on how to get them out. Okay, so they're at the door, they're slamming. Most of the members have gotten out of the actual chamber. We now know that when those members were evacuating the chamber, the protesters, right where the shooting occurred, they were right at that door, right where the speaker's lobby is, and the only thing that's separating them from the members is a pane of glass. And subsequently, they did break that glass, and that was the moment when that woman was shot. And I can tell you, because I was about 10 to 20 feet above right exactly where that woman was shot. You could hear that gunshot. You knew it was a gunshot. And we were just hearing from cops, shots fired. Right around this time, they actually banged out the glass. I don't know what they used, but the cops thought it was a gun. They thought that they were shooting into the chamber. Cop told me they were shooting into the chamber. I think they were using a hammer or like a end of a flagpole, but the glass sort of smashes out. And then you have these police officers in the chamber, on either side of the of the doors, like with their guns drawn, and it's a very tense situation. We're just sort of sitting there. I was making my way to an exit when this happened, when the glass kind of came out, and I was stuck in this sort of no man's land where we thought they had a gun, and we were just told to get down. And right in the middle, I'm like, right, the chamber, the door is like right in front of me, and we're like, to cross it is sort of a path, and they were like, don't move, like don't go anywhere. So me and like 3 or 4 other reporters were among the very last to leave that chamber, and we were kind of stuck there for a while until they finally made a decision, like just everyone get out. And we exited through a side door and went down through a staircase that I'd never seen before on Capitol Hill, and I've been there for a decade. Went a direction. I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole story just because there's some security protocol things, but we went through areas that I'd never seen before. And then I was exited out with them and in the room with 150 members in the sort of secure location that they evacuated us to.
Is that when, did you have to get a COVID test after that? Because weren't there people that were positive for COVID?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd actually gotten coronavirus right immediately in March, potentially from covering Capitol Hill. But yes, and this was a big point of contention. We were in that room for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and there was a collection of Republicans, some of whom were the most aggressive members, sort of riling up this riot, who refused to wear a mask. And the sergeant at arms was, occasionally coming on over the microphone, basically saying, I remind you, we're all in close quarters here. Everyone needs to be wearing a mask. And like the Democrats would clap and the Republicans would sort of rumble. But it was a very weird situation because, again, it's Republicans and Democrats, and the tensions were extremely high. There were a lot of Democrats there who were just mad, who were like, these are the people to blame for this. At one point during this whole thing, when they were in recess, one of the first recesses, a member, Steve Cohen, who's up in the gallery, he shouts down at the Republicans, call up Trump, call off the dogs, this is your fault. And like the whole floor went. It was a really raucous situation. The floor staff particularly was really upset that Cohen would sort of rile up this moment, because it was like, we all need to work together just to get the hell out of here. The whole thing was extremely surreal. I never thought that it could happen on Capitol Hill. Clearly, they were unprepared for the situation. It was a very dangerous situation for a lot of people. It's actually amazing that there weren't more deaths, that there weren't more injuries. This could have been potentially a horrible situation. Lawmakers could have been killed. And frankly, they were minutes, if not seconds away from a lot of the worst of this.
So had there been other cases where you'd been threatened or you felt that your life was in danger in your 10-year career?
Yeah, not to this extent. I've seen protests that have gotten a little unruly. I've seen threats. I've seen, like active shooter situations on Capitol Hill. You always feel like it's one person that is quickly contained or detained. This was totally different. They just were totally outnumbered. And I remember walking in kind of feeling like, wow, I hope they're prepared for this, because it's certainly like the crowds are looking already pretty big and pretty riled up. And actually one of the things I heard while I was walking through the crowd was someone saying, Donald Trump's going to come, he's going to come march on the Capitol with us. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. But like the fact that you think that is maybe a little bit concerning.
Well, he said that too.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm coming down with you. Yeah.
It's just amazing. How did you write a story after that? Did you have to, you have to be disinterested when you're a reporter, but how do you write a story not knowing full well that this is one side that actually threatened you in your life? How do you write an unvarnished story at that point? And were you able to? Did you just sit right down in that room and just start typing away?
Yeah, I grabbed my computer and my phone, and I did do some work while I was in that room. Certainly a lot of it was just like, my phone was getting barraged with things. I had a few tweets that really blew up. So it was kind of an incredible thing. But I think for all reporters, we all have this sense of, we're here to sort of document the story, to tell the story, and we don't want to be part of the story. Unfortunately, on January 6th, there was a lot of a feeling of, we are part of the story because, frankly, we are partly their target. There's a lot of people who are mad, who feel like we're not telling their story, who feel like we're lying to them, and I feel really bad about that. I'm sorry that people feel like I'm lying to them. I get up every day, I go to Congress, and I try to tell the truth. I try to tell the story as best and as fairly as I can. And that didn't change on January 6th. It's unfortunate too that you see a lot of Republicans who have figured out that they can sort of score political points by vilifying the media, Donald Trump in particular. But we're just trying to do our job. And when they lie, it's another day. It's a Tuesday. When I lie, I get fired, right? So we're all just trying to do the job as best we can and as responsibly as we can.
So in all the time that you've been covering the stories, is it your perception that things are getting worse as far as your treatment of being a journalist? And also, I got a lot of questions from students saying, is it worse now as far as the partisanship than it ever has been? I mean, I guess you could put it into a number, but
yeah,
how bad is it?
It's worse than I've ever seen. I sort of started covering Congress when the Tea Party really came into town, and I covered those guys very closely. I've covered the Freedom Caucus very closely. I know those guys very well. I have really good relationships with a lot of them. I have seen over the last 4 years, as soon as Trump was elected, I think things sort of started to change. Republicans felt like they didn't need to talk to us. They could just tell us to, screw off, and that was actually politically advantageous for them. And when that started happening, and then there was also this moment, I think, right around Brett Kavanaugh, where a lot of the Republicans who were resistant to that belief actually fully embraced it, and they felt like, you know what, you guys are all corrupt and like whatever, screw you guys. And it's been a tough thing to watch, particularly because like there's a lot of members, a lot of these Republicans, and again, I've covered the Freedom Caucus very closely. I know Mark Meadows extremely well. I know Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, Jim Jordan. I know all those guys very well. They're guys who I could call this afternoon and have a chat with, right? But it's weird to watch them kind of figure out that the media is their enemy, actually, and that this is the way they want to go. It's really disheartening. And frankly, on Capitol Hill, this idea of unity is so far from where we're at. We have Democrats who are actually scared of their Republican colleagues, whether it be from them carrying guns into the chamber. A lot of them have said they're armed. I've heard from staffers that a lot of them actually are armed. They have been armed on the House floor. People are, quite frankly, a lot of people are terrified, and they're not exactly willing to let bygones be bygones. There was an exchange yesterday between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ted Cruz, where AOC said something like, this GameStop stuff, this has got to end. I'll work with Republicans. And Ted Cruz responded like, let's do it. Like, let's put aside our differences and you and I can work on this. And AOC was like, sorry, not you. You tried to get me killed three weeks ago. So I'm good on you. And it was kind of revealing, I think, for this belief. I think there's a lot of Republicans right now who feel like this is all part of the game, that them saying things about, election voter fraud and we're going to decertify the election and we're going to go, in Mo Brooks's word, another guy I know very well, we're going to go kick some ass. That's all part of the game, right? And if it's a game, it's all sort of permissible. And the feeling for Democrats is this is not a game. This is our lives. We're here supposedly to help people, and they don't feel like Republicans are playing by those same rules, are not there for the same reasons and intentions. So it's become, frankly, just crazy. The tension up there, I've never seen it like this. I saw a stat today that I think it's 14 of 24 Republican appropriators voted to decertify the election. And, as you know, being an appropriator used to be a political party in itself, right? It was Republicans, Democrats, and appropriators. That's not the case anymore. It's very much red versus blue. And it's I think a lot of Democrats are just terrified and don't.
This is despite the fact that Biden really has tried to say he wants unity. That's what he's focused in on. Certainly some of the things last week, but you see that really didn't take hold in any.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Democrats have a point when they say, when we talk about unity, we're not saying we got to have an agenda that's Republican focused, that we have to bend to the GOP platforms. I think they do mean it when let's take down the temperature. Let's cool the political rhetoric a little bit. But there's a lot of Democrats who feel like the first step in unity is accountability. And if these people aren't going to own up to the fact that, hey, we were lying about that whole voter fraud thing. Hey, yeah, maybe the Trump experiment didn't work out so great. Hey, maybe this guy did rile up that insurrection. Then you can't really have unity. That's just like paper macheing over a huge problem. And I think there's some truth to that. And it's certainly how a lot of Democrats feel. I also think that maybe some of the talk from Biden, I mean, certainly he truly does believe in unity and the idea that Republicans and Democrats can come together. But I think he's actually a little outdated in that belief in Washington. And I also think that a lot of his staff are just kind of saying, let's use the unity thing as sort of a performance that we can like call for unity or whatever. And meanwhile, we're going to just write our own executive actions and we're going to ram through a COVID bill on reconciliation just to have a sort of simple majority in the Senate. It's useful to them at this point to say the unity thing, but I don't think there's many people in Washington who believe that and or really are actually all that interested in it. There's a lot of Democrats who believe that there's no unity with Marjorie Taylor Greene or Annie Biggs or Mo Brooks. These people need to be expelled from Congress. They need to be heaved off from the party. And until that happens, we're not going to be able to work together on GameStop legislation.
Anytime there's a discussion about this, there's a group of people who say, well, all summer long, we saw all kinds of riots and bad behavior and criminal activity. And it was passed off as, well, that's okay because, of what they're protesting about. And so now a lot of people on the right say that and use it as a justification that, why is what happened on the 6th so bad compared to that? Let me hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, political violence in any form is not a solution. It's closer to terrorism than a solution. I would say that, and I think Democrats bring this up all the time, there's sort of a false equivalence between what happened on January 6th and what was happening during the Black Lives Matter protests. First of all, the vast majority of the Black Lives Matter protests were nonviolent. A lot of the violence was actually escalated from the police. Certainly, over the course of millions of people participating in those marches for months, you had more arrests and more damage and whatnot. Although that's actually, as far as a number goes, I think that the number was like 1.2 billion in damage. But quite frankly, we're going to spend a lot more on Capitol security in perpetuity than $1 billion, and the National Guard and overtime for cops and all that. This was honestly an attempt to overthrow the government. This was an attempt to block the certification of a free and fair election. And the idea, I mean, I've seen some of the intelligence that's come through about what these people were actually planning, whether it was to kidnap Democrats and summarily execute them. There's been subsequent things where they've said, we're going to pick off Democrats coming into the building, and then Republicans are going to just take over the government. This was not the same thing as the Black Lives Matter protests. I think the Black Lives Matter protests were standing up to, quite frankly, a lot of police brutality that has gone unchecked for way too long. And this was an attempt just to ignore a democratic election and do whatever you want. And their immediate goal was violence. It wasn't that we're going to march through the streets and show a force of nonviolent power. These people came, a lot of them came at least, for a confrontation with bear spray and zip ties and weapons. There's a lot of people who they knew that they had a lot of guns on those people, which is one of the reasons why the Capitol Police weren't really engaging with them, because they knew that they were going to get into a shootout at some point. So I don't really buy the idea that this, where were you during June and July and everything, and you can denounce it then, but you can't denounce it now. Frankly, I think that there a lot of Democrats would say, oh, I certainly don't believe in burning down businesses. I do believe in standing up for people's rights. But the January 6th incident was not, the people weren't there to stand up for their rights. They were there to overturn an election.
It's almost like you've gone to work in Afghanistan or Iraq at this point, and there's so much danger just doing your job. Has it changed the way that you think about the future? Like, is this something you want to continue doing? I mean, I mean, not only you seem pessimistic about the change, any kind of change of the mood in the future in Capitol Hill, but it's what we hear here at the Institute of Politics. There seems to be really no solution, and it continues to go like this. Uh, and so has this changed your mind about being a journalist and being on the front lines of all
I
this?
mean, the amazing thing about this job is I have had a front row seat to history a number of times. In the just the decade that I've been here, I've seen just some amazing things, and I often think that a lot of the work I do might not be appreciated during the time, right? If you're just getting quotes from Republicans about the latest Trump outrage, whether it be, the Helsinki press conference or his attempts to overthrow the election, or the Texas lawsuit, like those things, they're, those are in the moment not very important because we kind of know where people stand. We know that it's not going to really change anything. But I do feel like a responsibility. There's like sort of a historical heft to this job because you're recording it for like posterity. Like I know that there are Republicans who had to answer those questions who would have never had to answer them if I hadn't been there to ask it. So, I love the job. I love Capitol Hill. I love Congress. I love covering Congress. It's the best covered institution in the world. There are more reporters up there per square inch than probably anywhere else. And the access that we have is incredible. That's really the reason why it's the best covered institution in the world, because you can go up to members of Congress and any member of Congress can make news at any moment. I do fear that that might be changing soon because of the security protocol. I think that every time we have these incidents, they close off the Capitol a little bit more. It becomes a little bit more difficult to do our jobs. And that's tough. I think, we're going to have to confront that reality at some point here. But this is not a job that, I want to give up. There are moments in life where you're like, I know where I'm supposed to be. And when there's some, important vote, I know I'm supposed to be in the House gallery watching that. And that's an amazing feeling to have.
So things have changed a lot, obviously, in your time. And now, somebody can make news. As you said, one member can make news, but not only make news, but make it with a Twitter feed. And you're not anywhere near that. How has the job changed in that 10 years with the social media and Twitter?
I've been thinking about this a little recently. There's this new member, Madison Cawthorn, who is like a 25-year-old guy who he didn't hire any legislative staff, okay, which I'm sure is a variation from your time up on Capitol Hill. He just hired comm staff because the reality is freshman members of Congress aren't going to be making legislation. That's the truth. They're not even going to be writing amendments that are going to be signed into law. They are, however, going to get media attention. And I think it's, this is not a good sign, by the way. I want to be clear that I don't think this is great for America. But there's a sense for members of Congress that they do very little legislating now, and they do a lot of tweeting and making news and going on Fox News or MSNBC or whatever. That's largely part of the job now. There's a lot of jokes about how senators, they don't really do any of the old school legislating. Like in the Senate, there used to be this idea of the world's greatest deliberative body. Now it's just posting, right? Their jobs are posting, and they're like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. They're prolific posters, and just like on the left, that's true too. Brian Schatz and Chris Murphy, like great posters, great tweeters, right? Cory Booker. That's sad to see, but it also is a reflection of where the lawmaking power in Congress is now in the leadership suites. There are a collection of like 3 or 4 people in Congress who really make all the laws or really make all the big decisions. And until they change that, and I'd also say one of the reasons I really was fascinated with the Freedom Caucus is they started out with this idea that lawmaking needed to be decentralized, that we could change the process in Congress, and that it was way too top down. And I absolutely thought that was spot on, and I was very sympathetic to that idea. At some point, they kind of lost that message, and it's become just another like Trump fealty organization. But the reality is, until they've decentralized that, until the committees are back to making laws, until it's not in the leadership suites, until there's actually open rules in Congress so that anyone can offer an amendment on the House floor or the Senate floor, we're going to be in a bad place for a while.
Do you think that we'll see, like we did in 74 after Nixon's resignation, a lot more people get into journalism? Or do you think more Americans are more interested in hearing about this? I mean, what we hear about is that the media is biased. And so another question would be, you see an event and you write about an event, but you probably also go home at night and watch it being interpreted on television. Is there usually some bias there, or do you generally see that somebody's trying to do their job, like you said, and it's for somebody else to make an accusation that's bias?
Well, look, there's bias in everything in journalism does, and I want to be clear about what bias is. Bias isn't just Republican and Democrat, right? That's a very simple bias. It's also one of the easiest ones to really truly guard against. There's biases in what we cover, who we quote, where we quote them, what your lead is going to be, how hard your questions are going to be. There's a bias towards including three things, like examples of three things, which is a very journalism thing. Like, people have realized that as a writing thing, four things don't really stick in people's minds and it gets confusing, but three is a really good repetition. So there's all sorts of biases in journalism. The one bias that I think that we've guarded against, and maybe overguarded against, is that political bias, because the idea that, like, you're right. There's a sense of reporters are just going to write, well, the Democrats said this, and well, the Republicans said that, and that's that. That's not the job of journalism. Journalism, when it's done correctly, is actually getting down to the truth of the matter, and actually sometimes offering a perspective on it. It's not just he said, she said. We are kind of arbiters there. We're actually keeping score of the whole thing. So when Andy Biggs says the election was stolen in Arizona, and Ruben Gallego, a fellow Arizona, he's a Democrat, he says no, it wasn't. Our job isn't to go, Andy Biggs says it was, and Ruben Gallego says it wasn't. Who's to say? Our job is to say, okay, he says it is, and here's the truth of the matter. It wasn't, and here's why it wasn't, and here's why his claims are fraudulent, and what is he gaining from this? What's like sort of the game theory in his mind from this? Here are his political motivations. Here's where the voters are. And unfortunately, on the Republican side, a lot of those voters, they just want to believe what they already believe. They believe that Donald Trump won the election, and they see that, well, all my friends voted for Donald Trump, and Joe Biden had 50 people at his events. We had 50,000 in Oklahoma. And they don't ever want to address the fact that, okay, well, what's underneath this, right? There was coronavirus. There's plenty of people who felt like Joe Biden should be president, over 80 million, in fact. And anytime you say, no, you're wrong, people just shut off. And we've offered them a media ecosystem where there's all these people, whether it be OAN or Newsmax or Fox News, who say, no, you're right? Or here's why you're right. And it's very comforting for those people to be assured that they are correct and that none of their beliefs are wrong. But that's not our job, right? We're not here to soothe people into believing false things because they want to. We're here to tell them sometimes hard truths. The hard truth is Donald Trump won the 2016 election. The hard truth is Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Whether you like it or not, those are facts, and we are here to convey those facts. And also to report on the landscape of these things and the motivations of these actors. But we're not here just to write he said, she said.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit back to your college days. And I just want to get a sense that from when you were here, did you always know that you were going to go into this field? Was this something that you loved? I know that you did an internship when you were at St. Anselm in the field. So you didn't go to Capitol Hill and work for one side or the other like a lot of people do. You went right to journalism. But tell me, is it something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
So I studied politics at St. Anselm, and I thought I always wanted to maybe get into politics. I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know if that meant I was just going to get into communications or public relations or whatever. And I did a few. Thankfully, we had. I will give St. Anselm credit on this. We had a lot of opportunities through those debates. The 2008 debate. We had in early June of 2007, I believe it was. We were doing debate runner stuff for CNN. And then that next winter we had Fox News here. I actually was a debate runner for Fox News for 2 weeks, getting paid $100 a day. We had ABC here. We had those debates. And I saw that it was actually an amazing thing. And there was actually a lot of access and it was very cool. So, and actually while I was working for Fox News, I talked to, he was a guy who was the editor at Roll Call named Mort Kondracki, who you'll remember from his days, but there's an SNL skit where he's always referred to as Morton Kondracki. But I met with Mort Kondracki. I had a very pleasant conversation with him, and that was fine. Come around to 09, or I guess this is still 08, and it's my junior year, the fall of my junior year, and I decided I wanted to go to Washington. I wanted to do a semester away from St. Anselm, that spring semester of 09, and work somewhere in Washington, do something there, because I think that's where I want to be anyway. And had a few offers from places. I talked to a number of different, I guess, lobbying shops that I could have gone to. I have this one distinct memory of talking to the Financial Services Roundtable, which is a big, and this is, the height of the financial collapse. So this was a very interesting possibility. And I was almost ready to say yes. And I had a conversation with a guy and I was just like, oh, I'm not so sure. And then I got on the phone with the people at basically Roll Call. It was a team called Gallery Watch, which is sort of, at the time, it was Roll Call's version of CQ. And I just had a delightful conversation with them. We talked about Mort Kondracki and how, I had talked with him before. We talked politics for a while. And by the end of the conversation, they were like, yeah, you know what? Why don't you just come intern for us? It'd be a great experience for you. And I was like, you know what? I think I'll have a lot more fun doing that than going to, staple papers at Financial Services Roundtable. So I went with them and I was here. I arrived in Washington almost exactly 12 years to the date. So the very beginning of Obama's presidency. And I saw on Capitol Hill, there was a lot of opportunities for me. Basically, at some point they figured out, hey, this guy can write a little bit. Why don't we just send him to obscure congressional hearings on Somali pirates and stuff like that? Or healthcare was actually a big thing going on at the time. So they're super hard pressed to find people. And they're just just throw the intern at a congressional hearing and let them write up a story. And I loved it. I loved the fact that you'd go in and you'd hear what these people were saying and you'd have to break it down and you'd have to put the puzzle together. I loved covering Congress. I loved everything that these people were saying. I thought some of these people were saying some of the smartest things I'd ever heard about Somali pirates and healthcare. It was just a wonderful experience. So I walked away from that and I felt like, wow, that's really a really cool direction to go in politics. I am very interested in that. And I was lucky enough after I graduated, right after I graduated in 2010, the next year, that they called me. They had been a merger with Gallery Watch and CQ and Roll Call. So it was one weird family, CQ Roll Call. And they basically said, hey, why don't you, come work for us as a researcher. And then we'll get you in the door doing journalism stuff. And that's exactly what I did. I came to Washington, making no money and working for CQ. At some point, I became a reporter with CQ, and then at that point, I moved over to Roll Call very quickly after that. And Roll Call is a lot of fun. They're a lot more sort of shoot from the hip than CQ. CQ is the most straight-laced, organization you'll find in journalism. They don't use the word "only" in front of percentages because that would be a bias to say only 41%. Who are we to say that? So it was an amazing experience, and the whole thing showed me how journalists have the most fun, they have the most access, and quite frankly, they often know the most on Capitol Hill. I'm always shocked to find members of Congress. We ask them a question, and then you stop the recorder and they go, "All right, so what are you hearing?" Because frankly, they don't know all the time, and we're kind of conduits for the whole thing, and it's an amazing thing to be in the know and to be in the mix like this. It was just it was the perfect job for me.
So if you were to go back in time and give advice to yourself 10 years ago, standing with your diploma on the Hill, What would that be? What mistakes would you try to avoid? What did
Don't
you?
take Latin would be my first. Take a foreign language like French. I really don't have much. I got to tell you, I really did love my time at St. Anselm. I thought I learned so much. I would probably take more philosophy classes. We didn't have much in the way of journalism.
Why would you do that?
Well, I took, first of all, I took 6 philosophy classes while I was at St. Anselm, but I do feel like it's the one thing, if you're going to go to a liberal arts college, you have to learn how to live well and to think well. And philosophy still, like it, first of all, journalism is very much related to philosophy. And we're trying to sort out a lot of things. And I think part of it is the essential element of philosophy and journalism is truth. And I just think that, I probably should have majored in philosophy. It would have been a good idea. But, I think I had a great education. I took maybe 1 or 2-ish journalism classes. I started a fake newspaper while I was at St. Anselm. We issued like 4 papers. So I had a lot of fun. I learned what I needed to learn, I think. And the rest of the way, my one piece of advice, and I'm so glad I didn't do this, is I'm so glad I did not go to journalism school, because that would have just been more debt for really not much more payoff. Is once you get up here and you start doing the job, if you can do the job, then you can do the job. If you can't do the job, then quite frankly, a graduate degree from wherever is not going to really help you. So, I think I learned all the things I needed to. I think I really developed as a writer at St. Anselm. I developed as a thinker, and I think a lot of this, I still have a lot of lessons in my mind that I think back to, of like, man, that David Bannock 5, that Friday class where we discussed love, that lesson sticks with me a lot more than, a lot of other things.
So for the final question, I have it's a little bit more serious, but it's something that a lot of faculty have actually been talking to me about. And it's really on their minds. And if you could lend any insight to this, and that would be, how can the faculty and the college engage students in a dialogue about what happened on January the 6th and similar historical events? This is really on their minds because of everything that happened and how tragic it was, how shocking it was. And so any insight you would have into that.
So I've said this to Anne before, that my one criticism of St. Anselm is I think that, and this is, I'm from New Hampshire, so I'm certainly guilty of this. I think being brought up in New Hampshire from St. Anselm College, there's a sense of, let's value independence. Let's value the independent voter. Let's value the person who votes sometimes with the Republicans, sometimes with the Democrats, and, whatever. And the thing that's missing from that, I think, is moral clarity. I think that professors need to be clear about this and quite frankly, unforgiving to the Republicans. This was a Republican coup, okay? It wasn't a, extremist element. This was from the very core of that ideology. It's from the president top down through the entire conference. You had 137 Republicans hours after this happened vote to decertify an election based on nothing, okay? They didn't learn any lessons. This isn't about, how do we work with both sides or whatever, and how do Democrats come to terms with the Republicans and Republicans? No, you need to be clear about this and what this was. And I think that you can be unforgiving, and quite frankly, St. Anselm going forward should ask tough questions of the Republicans who come to St. Anselm College and want to campaign for president, and who, where were you on January 6th? What were you doing? Did you think that Donald Trump lost that election fair and square? Was there systemic voter fraud? And if the answer to those questions is, well, I don't know, and well, I don't, that's wishy-washy. And I think that St. Anselm professors and students can be forceful about this and say, this is a litmus test going forward for our democracy, because, make no mistake what those people were actually trying to do. They're trying to kill people. They're trying to overthrow the government, decertify an election, keep Donald Trump in power. And those things are beyond the pale. And I think that there's a responsibility for professors and for students to talk about those in those clear-eyed terms, and not be, well, who's to say?
Matt, I'm just going to say that as soon as COVID is over, we're going to get you up here.
Oh yeah.
I think that what you've said and what you've done in your life could be very valuable to our students here. But I will say this, I've heard a lot of speakers. I have to sit in the back of these rooms and listen to a lot of speakers, give a lot of speeches as you do. I think that there are a lot of faculty members and people in this St. Anselm community that have devoted their lives to making sure that people learn here and use their liberal arts backgrounds for good. And they're sitting back watching this right now saying, we did it. And you're the clear embellishment of this college. And I can't wait to have you back, because this last hour was very revealing. And for a lot of us, a very proud moment to hear you speak.
Well, I appreciate that. And I certainly missed that room there. I had a lot of good moments there too. And moments I refer back to, we're now like 16 years after the fact in a lot of these situations. I still remember like my freshman year, there was the Democrats were choosing their new head of the Democratic Party, and there was a huge hullabaloo with Paul Hodes and Kathy Sullivan and everything. There's been some amazing things that have happened in that room. Vermin Supreme, throwing glitter on Randall Terry, just some amazing moments. And I do certainly miss St. Anselm in that way.
Yes, we got more hits on that Randall Terry, and any other YouTube hit for St. Anselm College was Vermin Supreme. Anyway,
I will say my one element of political advocacy in my life is I did start. So I was writing a blog for something. I think we were associated with the Harvard IOP at the time, and we were doing a New Hampshire primary blog. And I went down to the State House and saw Hillary Clinton register for president. And that same day, there was Vermin Supreme registering for president, and he paid in $1 bills, and he was just the sideshow that he is. And I wrote a couple papers about Vermin Supreme, but one of the things I did do is I started in my sophomore year of college a Vermin Supreme for President 10 million strong Facebook page. And to this day, I still get people asking to join me all the time. It's just like very awkward situation for me, but I've had many conversations with Vermin in the following decades. So it's been a real pleasure.
Well, hopefully you'll avoid that in the future, but come back here. So thank you very, very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope to see you here right after we all get the shot.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.